I should have been excited. Most women look forward to their 30th birthday. But as mine crept closer, all I felt was dread. Instead of joy, it weighed on me like an obligation, a performance I was being forced to endure. The truth was, I hadn't felt like celebrating anything in a long time. This past year had unraveled me in ways I could barely admit, even to myself. My marriage, once the center of my world, had become suffocating, a cage built with invisible bars. Richard, my husband, had a talent for control. It started subtly, like raindrops before a storm. And then one day I woke up and realized that every decision, every choice, every corner of my life was dictated by him. He managed the company my parents had left me. He decided who we saw. And now he even dictated how I was supposed to look on my own birthday. "Don't embarrass me, Natalie," he had warned earlier that week, his voice sharp yet velvety, a threat wrapped in charm. "Everyone will be there. You can't just show up in one of your ridiculous skirts and sneakers." I had always loved comfort. Long flowing skirts, simple dresses, sometimes jeans with a bright blouse when the mood struck. That was who I was. But to Richard, that was unacceptable. He reminded me constantly that I wasn't 16 anymore, that I had to present myself like the polished wives of his colleagues. "Do you know how humiliating it is?" he sneered one evening. "To stand beside you when all my partners, wives, look elegant and refined, and you show up looking like some careless girl who hasn't grown up?" The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I would cross my arms, as if shielding myself from his contempt, but the damage always lingered. Sometimes I even wondered if he was right, if maybe I really was clinging to the past. But then I would catch myself. No. I knew what this really was. His slow, methodical way of breaking me down until I no longer recognized myself. As I wandered through the mall, weaving past mannequins draped in glittering gowns I didn't want, all I could think about was how far we had drifted. It was hard to remember the man he used to be. The man who once called me darling, who laughed at my silly jokes, who looked at me as though I was his whole world. Now his eyes held only irritation, sometimes even disgust, as though I were a burden he was forced to tolerate. Tomorrow he was throwing me a grand party. He had taken over everything. The guest list, the catering, the music. My only job was to show up in a dress he approved of. It was supposed to be my birthday. Yet it felt like his stage, a showcase of his wealth, his power, his perfect life. And me? I was nothing more than a prop. If I had my way, I would have spent the day quietly, with Katie, my little girl, maybe a close friend or two. We would have baked a cake, laughed together, let the day pass without spectacle. But Richard never cared about what I wanted. "You need to grow up, Natalie," he told me flatly. "Stop being ridiculous. A woman of your age should know better." That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the party, about the strangers who would smile fake smiles and pretend to celebrate me. Bitterness rose in my throat. It wasn't my celebration at all. It was his. Still, I knew I would go. I would put on whatever dress I bought, smile when expected, and play my part. Because in Richard's world, resistance wasn't an option, and tomorrow, I would once again be reminded of just how much of myself I had already lost. The mall was crowded that Saturday, its wide corridors echoing with footsteps and chatter. I drifted from one boutique to another, brushing my fingers, across sequined gowns and racks of silk dresses. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt like me. But this wasn't about me. It was about Richard and his standards. I was about to step into another shop when a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Darling." A familiar male tone, warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. My heart lurched. Richard. For a fleeting second, hope bloomed inside me. Maybe he had come to surprise me, to help me pick something out. Maybe, just maybe, he'd remind me of the man I used to love. I turned, ready to smile through tears, but the smile never came. Because there he was, Richard, not 10 feet away, and beside him stood a woman I had never seen before. She was striking. Tall, slender, golden hair cascading over her shoulders, her blouse hugging her curves effortlessly. She radiated self-assurance, the kind of beauty that turned heads without even trying. And Richard, he was looking at her the way he hadn't looked at me in years. His hand rested casually on her hip, his lips close to her ear as he whispered something that made her laugh. And that word, darling, hadn't been meant for me at all. The air thinned. My chest tightened as though the ground had fallen away. I wanted to storm out, to scream, to demand an explanation, but my legs betrayed me. They carried me forward instead, following them like a ghost. They walked into a bridal boutique, the glitter of white gowns sparkling in the window display. A bridal boutique. My pulse roared in my ears. This couldn't be real. It had to be. Some kind of misunderstanding, a cruel joke. Yet no one laughed. No cameras appeared to reveal it was staged. I slipped inside behind them, hiding between a row of tuxedos, gripping the fabric so hard it anchored me in place. Something elegant, Richard said smoothly, patting the woman's side as though she were already his. The most beautiful gown you have. She deserves nothing less. The sales associate beamed and hurried off. The blonde, Amanda, I would soon learn, pouted playfully, brushing her manicured nails along Richard's chest. "You're making me blush," she teased. "Not nearly enough," he murmured back, his voice thick with the affection he hadn't spared for me in years. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, straining to hear every word. "When will you finally divorce that wife of yours?" Amanda asked, lowering her voice, but not enough to escape me. "I'm tired of waiting, Richard." "Soon," he assured her, squeezing her hand. "As soon as I push her to sign the papers, she'll transfer the house, the company, everything. She has no idea what's coming. Just a little more pressure and she'll give in." "Trust me," Amanda giggled, leaning into him. "And then we'll have our wedding next month." "Of course," Richard promised, his tone steady, certain. "By then she'll be out of the picture, permanently." I staggered back, my breath catching. The dresses blurred around me, ivory and lace spinning in my vision. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. He was planning to erase me, to strip me of everything. My home, my inheritance, even the company my parents entrusted to me. The man I once trusted with my heart was preparing to destroy me. And in that moment, hidden among gowns meant for new beginnings, I realized my marriage was already over. Richard had made his choice. And if I didn't act carefully, I wouldn't just lose him. I'd lose everything. By the time I left the mall, the world was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove to Katie's school. I tried to gather myself, but no amount of deep breaths could erase the sound of Richard's voice promising another woman a wedding. When I pulled up, Katie spotted me through the glass doors and came running. Well, as close to running as she could. Her gait was uneven, one leg shorter than the other. She stumbled, then steadied herself, her pigtails bouncing. "Mommy!" she squealed, throwing her arms around me. I knelt and hugged her tight, breathing in the sweet scent of crayons and childhood, clinging to her sweater. For a moment, the horror of earlier faded. Katie was my anchor. She always had been. "Mommy," Matthew teased me again today, she said as we walked to the car, her voice matter-of-fact but fragile. He said I walk funny. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, though my chest burned. "Sweetheart, you are perfect exactly the way you are. Don't let silly words make you forget that." She nodded, but her eyes dropped. She was only 6. How could she understand the cruelty of children, or the cruelty of her own father? The memory struck hard. Richard glaring at me months ago after Katie tripped carrying her doll. His face twisted with disgust. She's crippled, Natalie. Do you realize what people think when they see her? This is your fault. My family doesn't have defects. This came from you. I had clutched Katie close, my throat raw. She is not crippled, I whispered. She's strong. She's smart. She's ours. But Richard only sneered. She'll never be normal. You gave me a flawed child. Even now, the echo of his words made my stomach churn. I shook it off and helped Katie into her booster seat. You're beautiful, I told her softly. Stronger than anyone I know. As I closed the car door, a voice startled me. Excuse. Me, Mrs. Whitaker, a man said, using my married name, one I still wasn't used to hearing. I turned. A tall man in a tailored suit approached, holding the hand of a small boy. Recognition hit instantly. The boy was Matthew, Katie's classmate and tormentor. Mr. Hayes, I said cautiously. He offered a warm smile. Daniel, please. I wanted to apologize for my son. I heard about today. He glanced down at Matthew, who shifted uncomfortably. He's been unkind, and I'm truly sorry. Katie watched from the window, wide-eyed. Matthew muttered something too soft to hear. Daniel crouched to meet his son's eyes. Go on. I'm sorry, Katie, Matthew mumbled, not quite looking at her. I won't tease you again. Katie pursed her lips, then gave a tiny, regal nod. Fine, but only if it's the last time. Daniel chuckled softly, relief flickering across his face. She has spirit, he said, straightening. I know, I replied quietly. And I'm proud of her. We lingered. He asked about Katie, about her leg. I hesitated. This was private, raw. But something about his steady gray eyes invited trust. I'm a divorce attorney, he said when I asked about his work. I see families at their worst, but also at their turning points. And I happen to have a close friend who's a pediatric orthopedic surgeon in San Diego. He specializes in cases like your daughter's. He's the best I know. My breath caught. Really? Daniel nodded. I could connect you. He's changed lives. Katie could have a different future. For the first time that day, a spark of hope flickered in me. Amid betrayal and despair, a stranger offered a possibility I had almost given up on. I looked at Katie, her small frame, her brave smile, and silently promised her I would find a way. The night of the party arrived, and the Whitaker mansion gleamed like something out of a glossy magazine. Chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors. Laughter echoed against the vaulted ceilings, and every corner was filled with people in glittering gowns and tailored suits. It should have felt like a celebration, but to me it was nothing more than a stage for Richard's arrogance. He had made it clear that Katie was not welcome. She'll only embarrass me, he had said earlier, his voice cold and final. The guests don't need to see a little girl stumbling around. She stays upstairs. I swallowed my fury for the sake of peace, but inside my chest burned. As the evening wore on, I stood by Richard's side, smiling at people I hardly knew while they pretended to care. Oh, Natalie, you look radiant, one woman gushed, her diamond necklace catching the light. But her eyes slid past me almost instantly to Richard, the one she truly wanted to impress. I forced a polite nod. Another man clinked his glass against mine, congratulating Richard on his success, as if the party was about him alone. Every word felt like another brick laid on top of me, pressing me down. My cheeks ached from smiling and my stomach churned with exhaustion. Then, like a storm cloud tearing across a sunny sky, Amanda appeared. I froze when I saw her step into the ballroom, draped in a crimson dress that turned heads instantly. Gasps rippled through the guests. She moved with calculated grace, her lips curved in a knowing smirk. She shouldn't have been here, and yet there she was, an uninvited guest in Richard's kingdom. My heart hammered as she approached, her eyes locking onto mine. "Natalie," she said sweetly, loud enough for the people nearby to hear, still playing the perfect wife. Her words sliced through the air, daring me to react. Richard's hand tightened on my arm, his smile plastered in place for the crowd. "Ignore her," he whispered through gritted teeth. But Amanda had already stirred the whispers, and people watched us with barely disguised curiosity. My throat dried, but I refused to let her see me break. I turned away, pretending she was nothing. More than a shadow, though the rage simmering in me threatened to spill over. Then Richard made his move. With a clap of his hands, he called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming across the hall, "I have a special surprise for you tonight." My blood ran cold when I saw the nanny leading Katie toward the staircase. She was dressed in a frilly dress, one she hated, her small hands clutching the banister. Richard's eyes gleamed with pride as he gestured toward her. "My daughter will now perform a little dance for you all." The guests clapped politely, oblivious to the cruelty of it. Katie's face was pale, her lip trembling as she glanced at me for rescue. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, my voice sharp and clear. "No, she will not." The room fell silent, every eye darting between me and Richard. "She is not a toy for your amusement, Richard. She's a child, our child, and you will not humiliate her like this." The tension cracked through the air like lightning. Richard's smile never faltered, but his eyes turned icy. "Natalie, sweetheart," he said in a voice dripping with condescension, "I think the champagne has gone to your head. You're clearly not yourself." He chuckled softly, inviting others to laugh with him. "Please forgive my wife. She tends to get emotional." Laughter bubbled from the crowd, hesitant at first, then stronger, as if they feared offending their host by not joining in. Heat flooded my cheeks, humiliation clawing at my skin. But worse than the mockery was the realization that Richard had already prepared for this. From the corner of my eye, I saw his phone angled discreetly, recording everything. He wanted evidence, proof that I was unstable, irrational, unfit, proof he could use to rip Katie away from me. I stood frozen, torn between anger and despair, while the party swirled around me in a haze of clinking glasses and forced laughter. Richard had turned my resistance into a spectacle, and in that moment, I knew the battle lines had been drawn. Daniel booked us on the earliest flight he could find. Within hours, we were on our way to San Diego. After a few days of preoperative evaluations and physical assessments, Katie was finally scheduled for surgery. Standing by the ocean that first evening, watching the waves roll in, I almost dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, we had turned a corner. Katie clung to my hand as we walked into the hospital the next morning, her small frame dwarfed by the sterile hallways. She tried to be brave, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel stayed close, carrying her backpack, cracking. Little jokes just loud enough to make her giggle. For the first time in months, she wasn't staring at the floor. She looked up, and in that simple tilt of her chin, I saw courage I hadn't known a child could carry. The surgery lasted hours. I sat in the waiting room with Daniel by my side, my fingers twisted together so tightly they hurt. Every time a nurse passed, my heart skipped. Daniel never once left me. He brought me water, reminded me to breathe, and when I couldn't stop, shaking, he quietly wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "She's strong, Natalie," he whispered, "and she's not alone. Neither are you." Those words anchored me when I thought I would fall apart. When Dr. Alvarez finally appeared, exhaustion written across his face, but his eyes steady. I knew before he spoke. "It went well," he said, and the world crashed back into color. Relief overwhelmed me so hard I had to sit down. Katie would walk again. Not right away, not without pain, but she would. The weeks that followed were grueling. Physical therapy was a battlefield. Tears, frustration, moments when Katie screamed she couldn't do it anymore. But then there were days she stood for a few seconds longer or took a shaky step without help. I watched her fight for every inch of progress, and I realized she wasn't just healing. She was teaching me what resilience truly looked like. Every evening after therapy, Daniel drove us to the beach. We would sit on the sand as the sun dropped into the horizon, Katie leaning against me, Daniel skipping stones across the tide. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. The silence wasn't empty. It was steady, full of unspoken understanding. He became more than a friend. He became a constant, someone who believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. One night, Katie managed to walk from the blanket to the shoreline, her steps awkward but determined. The sea breeze lifted her hair as she spread her arms wide, laughing through her tears. Daniel clapped, his grin stretching wide, and I cried, without shame. Because in that moment, I saw the future again. Not the broken one Richard had left us with, but something new, something whole. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Richard unraveled. I heard through acquaintances that he had stormed into my old neighborhood demanding to know where I'd gone. He called, left messages that shifted from rage to begging, but I never answered. Amanda, once so smug in her alliance with him, disappeared as soon as she realized he had no claim to the fortune he thought he'd inherit. Without money, without control, he was nothing to her. By the time Katie walked across the sand unassisted for the first time, Richard's voice had become nothing more than static on a distant line. The ocean roared beside us, endless and alive, and I let it carry. Away every ounce of fear. We were healing, not just Katie's legs, but our hearts too. And Daniel was there, steady as the tide, showing me that sometimes family isn't just what you're born into, but what you choose to build. The courthouse in downtown Seattle felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the weight pressing down on me as I walked in, flanked by Daniel on one side and my sister on the other. I had spent years inside the walls of the home Richard and I built, believing it was indestructible. Now those years had brought me to this moment, a moment where everything would be decided not in whispers behind closed doors, but in front of a judge under oath with evidence and truth laid bare. Daniel had agreed to represent me. He wasn't just my attorney. By now, he had become a steady presence. Someone who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "Stay calm," he whispered as we entered the courtroom. "The evidence is on our side. Today he can't hide behind charm or lies. Today, it's only facts." Richard sat across the aisle, perfectly tailored in his dark suit, his hair slicked back as though presentation alone might sway the judge. But behind that polished exterior, I could see the tremor in his jaw, the stiffness, in the way he adjusted his cufflinks. He knew this wasn't his arena. He couldn't bully or manipulate a courtroom. The trial began with Richard's attorney confidently stepping forward. Their strategy was clear: discredit me, frame me as unstable and unfit, and their weapon, the infamous video from my birthday party, the one Richard had orchestrated, hoping to catch me looking drunk and unhinged in front of his colleagues. The clip was played on the large screen, filling the silent courtroom with shaky images of me raising a glass. Gasps echoed faintly from the benches, as if this one moment could decide everything. Richard leaned back in his chair, lips curling in smug satisfaction, but Daniel was ready. He rose calmly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Your Honor, we acknowledge this video shows my client holding a glass, but what it does not show, what it cannot prove, is that she consumed alcohol. In fact, we have medical evidence that proves the opposite. He handed over a full video recording taken by a guest from a different angle, clearly showing I never drank from the glass. In addition, he presented a signed statement from the catering manager confirming that I only requested non-alcoholic beverages throughout the evening. This video was not evidence of misconduct, Daniel continued, but evidence of my client's husband's attempt to frame her. It was manipulated to create an illusion. The judge studied the documents, then looked at me. Mrs. Whitaker, can you confirm under oath that you did not consume alcohol that evening? My voice was steady. Yes, Your Honor. I never drank. My husband pressured me to hold the glass. He wanted this footage to damage me. Richard's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. The test results speak for themselves. This evidence is inadmissible. I caught the flicker of panic in Richard's eyes. For the first time, he realized the fortress he had, built of lies, was crumbling. From there, the momentum shifted. Daniel laid out the financial records showing Richard's reckless spending, his secret withdrawals from our accounts, his failed business ventures. Witnesses confirmed his repeated absences from home, his neglect as a father. Piece by piece, Daniel painted a picture not of a devoted husband, but of a man who had systematically tried to dismantle the life we shared. The verdict, when it came, was almost surreal. The court grants full custody of the minor child to Mrs. Whitaker. She will retain ownership of the marital home and the family business. Mr. Whitaker's claims are denied. The gavel struck, final and echoing. It was over. Richard's face drained of color. He sat frozen as the reality settled. His reputation shattered, his career prospects gone, his grasp on power extinguished. Everything he had schemed for slipped through his fingers in a single ruling. As for me, I felt no triumph, only release. It wasn't about winning. It was about finally being free from his control, his cruelty, his endless games. I reached for Daniel's hand, and for the first time in years, breathed without fear. The courtroom emptied, footsteps fading into the marble hall. Richard stayed behind, slumped in his chair, a man undone by his own ambition. I didn't look back. My future was waiting outside those doors, brighter than anything he could ever take from me. The first real snow of the season had already melted when Katie ran across the park lawn with her arms stretched wide, her laughter ringing like silver bells. Months of grueling treatment, endless nights of worry, and the sharp smell of antiseptic had finally given way to freedom. I stood at the edge of the path, watching her race the wind, my heart swelling at the sight of her ponytail whipping behind her. The doctors had called her recovery remarkable, but I knew it wasn't a miracle. It was the result of her courage and every ounce of fight inside her small body. I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, knowing we had been given a second chance. Seattle's skyline greeted me with its familiar glass towers and restless energy when I returned a few weeks later. The city hadn't changed, but I had. I walked into the headquarters of my company, no longer the fragile woman who once hid behind Richard's shadow, but someone stronger, forged by betrayal and tempered by survival. The boardroom where I once felt outnumbered now felt like mine. I took my seat at the head of the table, fingers grazing the polished wood, and met the eyes of each executive without flinching. Their silence told me everything. They had expected a woman broken, but what they saw was a leader reborn. Richard's name had all but vanished from conversations in the office. His downfall had been swift once the truth of his schemes unraveled. Investors turned their backs, friends drifted away, and he was left clinging to scraps of a reputation no one cared to salvage. I heard whispers of him living in a rented apartment on the edge of town, alone, bitter, watching from the outside, as the empire he once tried to control slipped forever beyond his reach. Strangely, I felt no satisfaction in his ruin. Betrayal had already stolen too much of me. Vengeance would only chain me to the same misery. Katie tugged on my coat one evening as we walked past the harbor, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Do you think Daniel will come to dinner again soon?" she asked, her voice hesitant, as though afraid the hope in her chest was too fragile to voice. I smiled, tightening my arm around her shoulders. "I think he might," I replied softly. Daniel had been there through the darkest nights, steady and patient, never asking for more than I was able to give. Slowly, without forcing it, he had become part of our rhythm, driving us home from the hospital, bringing meals when exhaustion stole my strength, making Katie laugh when fear still lingered in her eyes. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't burdened by regret or fear. I could picture evenings filled with simple warmth, Katie's homework spread across the table, Daniel reading by the fire, and laughter that belonged to a home, not just a house. I wasn't ready to name it love. Not yet. But I was ready to open the door to the possibility of something real, something lasting, something honest. As the city lights flickered across the water, I breathed deeply of the cool air and felt the weight that had pressed on my chest for so long finally lift. Betrayal had once threatened to destroy me, but it had also stripped away illusions, leaving behind only truth. And in truth, there was freedom. Life doesn't always return what is stolen, but sometimes it offers something better, a chance to begin again. And standing there with Katie's hand in mine, her laughter echoing into the night, I realized that a new beginning wasn't just possible. It had already begun.